Now, I'm sure, like me, you're looking for some of the best cheap defenders in FPL. I'm going to go through all of them in this video. Alright, so there is a range, right? I've started this video at 4 million and I'm going to go up to 4.5. I'm counting the 4 and 4.5 million defenders as the cheap option. First up, we've got George Baldock. For me, he is the pick currently of the 4 million defenders. There's 3 in total, so stick around to see the other 2. He started regularly for Sheffield United last season. Importantly, he did so playing in the wing-back position, and the other 2 guys, well, you'll see what position they are, but they're centre-backs. So Baldock, he offers a bit of attacking threat playing in that position. Now, if you look at his stats last season, didn't light the world up in terms of attacking returns, but he didn't play all the games in the Championship. I think he spent a little bit of time on the sidelines with an injury, and I feel like, well, last time he played in the Premier League at least, he was a regular starter for Sheffield United and didn't do too badly in FPL. The fixtures, the first 3, obviously Man City at home's a tough one, but Palace and Forest, 2 games he could get some points in, and I think for me at least, for 4 million, he's the best. Right, the next of the 4 million options, we've got Bayer from Burnley. Now, another starter. He started 30 games in the Championship last season and obviously priced at 4 million. For me, Burnley were the best team in the Championship by some margin. Vincent Kompany have been playing some really nice football, and just in general, I think the players on the pitch on paper were better than the rest of the league. And in terms of defences as well, Burnley were the strongest in terms of expected goals conceded. They had the fewest expected goals conceded across the whole Championship. And despite him being a centre-back, whereas Baldock's a wing-back, the attacking returns there are pretty comparable. Played 6 less games and got 1 less attacking return. So he does look like another good option. And, I'd suggest Burnley being the strongest team that's been promoted this season, I think that's a strong argument to potentially have him in your team. Next up, we've got Amari Bell of Luton. He played the most fixtures of all of the 4 million defenders in the Championship last season, played 44 of the 46 games that were possible. Only thing down with him is he's currently on international duty for Jamaica at the CONCACAF Gold Cup, which means I don't think he's going to get a full pre-season in for Luton. He's got to have a holiday at some point, and that means I'm not too sure he's going to start the season. I mean, looking at his stats last season, he got 1 goal, 1 assist in 44. I mean, you can pretty much rack that down to offering pretty much 0 attacking threat. The only thing you can say is, once the season gets going, you'd like to think based on those Championship numbers at least, he can nail himself in that Luton team. And yeah, as I said, not necessarily going to start the season, but as the season goes on, he could become an option. Another thing that I saw FPL Mate pointed out on Twitter, if he, a lot of players are going to buy him. I think he's the most popular of the 4 million defenders so far. I foresee him not playing the first game week of the season and people selling him straight away and him becoming almost immediately 3.9 million or something like that. That's just the feeling I get, and I think I agree with FPL Mate on that one. So just one to watch out for there on Bell. All right, we've got the 4.5 million defenders next. I'm going to start with my pick, but that certainly doesn't mean the rest of the guys I'm going to mention aren't any good. So please stick around to see all of them. We've got Botman at 4.5 million. For me, he's just my current pick of the bunch, really. Newcastle were the joint best defence in the league last season for fewest goals conceded. They conceded 33, which is joint first with Man City. I think he's absolutely nailed in that Newcastle team. He's by far and away their best centre-back. When he got firing in that team, that's when Newcastle really kicked on defensively. I think we're definitely going to see some rotation in that Newcastle team for the Champions League, but does that mean Botman's going to come out of the team with how good he's been? And the fact he plays centre-back, he could play just every game without being rotated, to be honest. The one downside to him, he's got Man City and Liverpool in the first 3 fixtures. And if you're going to need him to come off your bench or something like that, those 2 fixtures are not very good. I'd envisage Newcastle conceding in both of them. So whilst I'm saying he's the current pick, based on those first sort of 3 fixtures with those 2 games mixed in, not too sure. Now, alongside Botman, you've got Dan Burn. He's a perfectly decent alternative with potentially more attacking upside. He scored 1 goal last season, 1 more attacking return than Botman, so there's not too much in it. Now, I think just the general fact he plays fullback, he's going to get himself in more attacking position than Botman's going to be in, but that doesn't obviously necessarily mean he's going to get the returns as we saw last year. From what I've seen of Newcastle, though, he seems to be the target of pretty much all the set pieces they take. Those Kieran Trippier in-swinging corner kicks seem to always end up on Dan Burns' head. He just can't direct them into the goal. I think for me, once the Champions League starts, the fact he plays at fullback, which could potentially involve a bit more running, we could see a bit more rotation, particularly involving a fullback like Dan Burn. My next suggestion is Tyrone Mings. Last season, he was the top scoring 4.5 million defender. He did so by 1 point, and I think that was largely down to the fact that Emery joined, took over and transformed them defensively. I think just in general, Villa as a whole improved when he took charge, particularly defensively. The one comment I'd have about Mings, which detracts him from being my favourite, is they've signed Pau Torres, they've got Konsa and Diego Carlos, who can all, play in those centre-back positions. Those are three very capable centre-backs alongside Tyrone Mings. So is he going to stay in that team and play 35 Premier League games like he did last year? I'm not totally sure. And for that reason, I don't think I'm going to be going for him. And another thing to consider, all those defenders have been signed because they've got European football. They've qualified for the Conference League. So we'll see what happens there. But for me, I think I'm just going to give Mings a miss this season. Okay, next up is a Brentford asset in Rico Henry. For me, he's absolutely nailed in that Brentford team. Perfectly decent, 4.5 million, set and forget option. Played 37 of the 38 games last season. Probably disappointed a little bit in terms of the attacking returns he got. I think he had a bit more potential than the 2 returns that he did get. Yeah, just in general, I guess the comment is he plays like fullback / wingback, but doesn't necessarily get that many attacking returns. And with Brent, I think the one positive is Brentford aren't in Europe. They don't really have any other competitions to worry about. So you got to feel like Henry's nailed to start pretty much every game. And those first 3 fixtures, Tottenham at home, Fulham away, Palace at home, they're not too bad. It's a good start for Rico Henry, and I think he's definitely a consideration at that price. Next up is Rico Henry's partner in crime, Ethan Pinnock. Both 4.5 million, and there's very little to choose between them. Both of them scored 112 points last season. The only thing I would say, Pinnock played 7 less games? Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, Henry played 37 and Pinnock played 30. So slightly more points per game there for Pinnock, which in my opinion probably makes him a slightly better asset. And Pinnock scored 3 goals last season, so he did have a bit more goal threat as well. So I'd say of the 2, slightly verging towards Pinnock. Rattling through these, next up we've got Mark Gahey from Crystal Palace. For me, absolutely nailed in that Palace starting lineup. That Gahey and Anderson double up in defence, or the double centre-back partnership is really, really good. Both good on the ball and pretty capable defensively. He only kept 9 clean sheets last season, but 6 of them came when Roy Hodgson took over. So I think that sort of talks about the impact that he had on that team when he took over. And whilst he only scored 1 goal last season, in the 21-22 season, I think I remember him being a pretty decent goal threat. So there's a chance he could refine that sort of goal threat form next season, and that would make him a really good option. For me, though, at the moment, I'd say he's a very decent player you can just set and forget in your team. And looking at those first 3, apart from Arsenal at home, there's some good fixtures. Next up then, we've got Tyreek Mitchell. Nothing really to choose between him and Gahey. I think there's upsides to Gahey in the fact he might have a bit more goal threat. And obviously Mitchell has a bit more assist threat. I would say just the fact that he plays at fullback and he's one of the top tacklers in the Premier League suggests that he could be slightly better for bonus points. But in reality, it's basically a coin flip between the 2 of them if you fancy a Palace defender. Next up is a player I actually think could be quite interesting. Given that Colwill looks to be staying at Chelsea now, would suggest that Webster might be nailed in that Brighton starting lineup. There was a bit of competition between him and Colwill, where the 2 of them were being rotated. But to be honest, Webster did have a few injuries last year. One thing to say about Webster, he's cheaper than Duncan Estupinian. So if he plays pretty much every game, you're going to be getting him for about 0.5 million less. One thing though, as I said, he does have a pretty woeful injury record, and we might see some rotation when European football starts. But I think to start the season, Luton, Wolves and West Ham, 3 pretty decent fixtures that Brighton could keep some clean sheets in, which makes Webster pretty good value at that price. Nearly there, the penultimate player I've gone for is Badiashile from Chelsea. For me, he had a really good time when he signed for Chelsea. It was unfortunate he just wasn't picked in that starting lineup. He played 11 games and they kept 4 clean sheets. I think that's a decent ratio between games played and in clean sheets. But for whatever reason, Lampard particularly didn't fancy him. I think he's a really good defender myself, and he has a chance of nailing himself in that Chelsea defence. The only thing to say is it depends how they line up. I feel like that Chelsea squad is built to be like a sort of 3-5-2 playing team, or at least a 3 at the back playing team, which means there's 3 slots for a centre-back to play. However, if Poch decides to play 4 at the back, it's likely to be Fofana and Thiago Silva, or at least Thiago Silva's going to be nailed in that team. So it remains to be seen how they line up in pre-season. I'd like to think if Badiashile gets regular starts in pre-season, that's going to translate across to the Premier League where he could be an option. But I think it's one to monitor. And just in general, having watched him, and he did score a goal in those 11 games, he's absolutely massive and a real threat from corners. So we could see him knocking a few goals next season as well. And finally, my final Chelsea defender, we've got Levi Colwill. Now, it looks like Chelsea are really reluctant to sell him. I know Liverpool are inquiring about him, and I'd imagine Brighton would want him back too. But they're reluctant to sell him, which means it suggests at least that he could be in Poch's plans. Again, similar to Badiashile, it's a wait and see for how Chelsea line up during pre-season as to whether he's got a chance of playing. And also, he wasn't nailed, say, for Brighton. I know, obviously, Brighton finished higher than Chelsea last season, so that's sort of telling. But yeah, the fact he wasn't nailed for Brighton makes me think he's probably not necessarily nailed to start with for Chelsea. But similar to Badiashile, if either of these guys can nail themselves in that Chelsea team, can't really moan at 4.5 for a Chelsea defender. That's the end of the video. I may have whizzed through all of those players, but I hope you can appreciate the time it took to put together those graphics, do all the research and find out the stats about those players. If you find that useful and have a favourite defender from each of those price categories, let me know in the comments and leave a like rating on the video. If you want to see more, please subscribe, which should just be there. And I'll see you in the next one.